I want to welcome you to today's NTCA Roundtable Live. I'm Mark Heinlein with the National Tile Contractors Association. Today is January 13th, 2021, believe it or not. This is the first of many programs we'll be having this year. We will have an average of 2 roundtables every month, and we are glad that all of you are joining us today. Today's topic is submerged installations, and we've opened up the waiting room, and everyone from the waiting room is on their way in. Come on in. Feel free to turn on your camera. We'd love to see how you're doing today, and we're glad you found the time to spend with us today. Very glad to have you. As you come in, I want to announce our guest host, and he'll give you the rest of the instructions for what we'll be doing today. And our guest host today is Mike DeGiusti. Mike DeGiusti is NTCA's Region 8 Director, and he has a company in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Doing pretty good. You ready for me to take off?
Ready for you to take off, Mike.
Okay. For those that have not looked at or don't have the NTCA's applications, and it's on page 156 and for however many pages. So that's a lot of the stuff several of the people on this committee program today was on the committee that put this together. And of course that goes along with the TCNA handbook of P601. So from there, I guess Mark has a few slides he's going to show to get some things going. If you have questions, you can either raise your hand or just put it in the chat room, and we'll see what we can just answer, and just whatever you have to ask about, we can answer.
That's right. And I do want to mention that we have several guest panelists today from major setting materials manufacturers, and I'm going to just tell you who they are really quickly here. They're available to all of you today to answer questions and explain what we're looking at. And maybe as I call your name, you can raise your hand. Let's start with Brett Monty from Mercrete. Hi, Brett. Gilles Begnolis from Ladecrete International. Hi, Gilles.
Hey, everybody. Hello.
Mark Penine from Ardex. Hi, Mark. Arthur Minty from Ladecrete.
Hi, everybody.
Then we have Mike Michelizzi from Custom Building Products. Hi, Mike.
Hi, everyone.
Jim Whitfield from Mapei Corporation. Hi, Jim.
Hey, guys.
Greg Shad from Tech HB Fuller. Hi, Greg.
Hey, folks.
Thank you very much for all of you helping us out today. I hope I didn't miss anybody. So those are our setting material manufacturers. And since we have a large audience, I do want to introduce Rob Roderick with the NTCA. Hi, Rob.
Hey, guys. How are you doing? Glad you're here.
And Randy Fleming with the NTCA. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Mark. Hey, everyone else.
Rob and Randy will be monitoring the chat screen, so feel free to use the chat, and Rob and Randy can speak with you there and bring your questions to the group if you'd like to comment that way. So let's go ahead. I'm going to bring up a photo just a little bit at random for our team to discuss. So I'll be sharing my screen, and let's start with this one.
So that's a photo I sent in, and it's just a pool. I took this picture when I was with another manufacturer, but it's a pool at a residence in, say, Eastern Colorado. It looks really nice there.
What exactly are we seeing there, Mike? I'm sorry, Jim, is there anything that stands out in particular?
I sent a few pictures in from this pool because there's a lot of issues. And the biggest one, there's 2 major ones. The biggest one is it lacks movement joints. There's a soft wall tile on the wall, soft white body tile on the floor, and the deck, if you might, and then glass mosaics throughout the pool. And they're all shattered. And it doesn't look like it there in this picture. It actually looks very, very nice. But I did send a few other pictures in that we can see that a lot better. It lacks movement joints, period. They tore out Yeah, there's an example in the wall. See the crack running down that tile right there. And that's not underwater. You know, that's sitting up. There's an area where they put in the drainage into a slab, and they poured new concrete, and they didn't do anything to treat that either. So there's cracking on both sides of the drainage. So it is common. I understand. You know, there you go. That's a great example on both sides of that. It just cracked right through it, and that's on the floor. So, I mean, just a shame, because you know these people spent a fortune trying to get this done and had a beautiful designer idea when they started, only to, you know, eventually have me come out, look at it and say, you got problems, big problems, and it's not going to hold up well. You know, I got the call to come out there because the glass mosaics weren't staying on, and it was just bizarre. And you'll see some more pictures on that, unfortunately. There's latex leaching, which is common throughout that pool, meaning they more than likely filled up that pool very rapidly after when they got it done. And think about latex, you know, and think about, for instance, a gallon jug of latex. If I took the lid off it and left it exposed to the air, eventually you'd come back and there'd be rubber at the bottom of it, or latex for that matter. It would just be a solid material. Not all of it, but as water evaporated. So when you think about powdered latexes and liquid ones added to mortars or grouts for that matter, you know, they need time to cure, to become a solid again, especially when you think about the dry ones. So this is what happens when you fill up a pool or submerged application too quick. And I see it everywhere I go. I see it in fountains. I see it, you know, all submerged applications typically have a line of latex right at the water line. But this is at the pool. I mean, I'm sorry, at the bottom of the pool. And very common throughout it. That's just an example of some of the glass mosaics coming out. Also, if you really could, it's tough to see in this picture, but it's cracked it's really pretty bad. There's a lot of cracking going on through there. Again, no movement joints and glass mosaic. It's also probably one of the most unattractive setting jobs I've ever seen, but that is not what I was sent there to comment on. So again, just a shame. Somebody spent a ton of money on this.
Hey, Jim, it's Brett Monty. You brought up a good point there, and I get a lot of phone calls on this as a manufacturer, and I remember this job. What is that, you know, I guess I get a lot of people asking what that time limit is. If I install tile underwater, or not underwater, but it's going to be in a submerged environment, how long do I need to wait before I can put water in that area?
Are you going to answer that, Brett, or do you want me to?
For me, I'd like to get everybody's opinion on it, because everybody differs a little bit. To me, I'm always going that 28 days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it varies on what your application, if it's interior, if it's exterior, if you're sitting in an aquarium for that matter, like this building was, right? They were totally enclosed in the middle of Colorado, I'm sure probably in the winter, and all the windows are closed, etc. It didn't cure very well. And I don't know how long they actually let it set. I do know they did not let it set long enough, but I would tell you generally 21 days is adequate with most mortars. In rapid setting, you certainly could do in 14. You know, sometimes we'll promote some as quick as 72 hours, but I'm with Brett. You know, you certainly need to be a minimum of 14 days to as much as 60 when it comes to latex modified materials, and make sure that that's latex, if you might, becomes a solid or rubber again to be beneficial. And it's not still emulsified in water, so it comes out. Here's another good example of a job up in Aspen.
Hey, real quick, can Jill's had his hand up to comment on something there. Can we go to him?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note that typically for cementitious grout, we tell people to wait 14 days. If it's an epoxy grout, we tell them 10 days. But I also want to emphasize the fill rate. You know, after that 14 days, you want to fill that pool at about 1 inch an hour. So about, 2 feet for 24 hours, just because the expansion that happens when you're filling the pool can be tremendous. Typically on a 50-meter pool, that pool is actually going to expand almost a 1/2 inch just by filling it with water. So having all the materials being completely cured is very important, and filling at the correct rate so that it doesn't blow out everything, especially when there's a case with no movement joints. That's it. That's all I had.
Point.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
again, you're seeing a picture of a large hot tub in a hotel in Aspen, outside, of course, and lacked cure time, and just a phenomenal amount of salts coming out of it.
Jim, can you explain for all of us, just so we really understand what that white stuff is that we're seeing there? What is that stuff?
So you're seeing a couple of things there, actually, and that's where it gets a little bit confusing. The easiest way to talk about efflorescence, if you might, is soluble salts. So that means if I, for that matter, wet it down, it typically kind of goes away, right? Because it's soluble. And it's in the alkali that's in cement, and then there's a water-soluble alkali in cement. And if it doesn't cure properly or it gets, really soaked early, sometimes they'll come to the top. You see it more frequently in grout. Latex leaching is a different animal, and that's what you see on that back wall, where it actually looks like diluted paint coming down through it, if you might. And that's not the same. You can wet that down and it'll stay there. And again, that's just latex coming out with the water. So it's a solid. When it hits the air, it wants to become a solid again. But when it's in water, it doesn't. It just becomes part of latex. So you're seeing a couple things going on there, unfortunately.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that does help, Jim. Thank you. And the easiest thing to help prevent this is cure time, right?
Yeah,
So
correct.
cure time
And
and scheduling.
and this is Mike McLizzy. Another issue that we see a lot is these exterior applications aren't protected. So you can get rain or snow. So you've done a beautiful job. Everything's perfect. And then you get rain on all your materials before they set or before they cure. And as Jim was saying, you get all that latex leaching out. So protecting it, for a period of time afterwards, also important.
Very, very, very important.
One of the things that, this is Greg Shad, one of the things that we've seen that's correlated to efflorescence in these kinds of jobs is there's actually voids between the tile and the mortar behind the job. So water can enter behind the tile, and you actually have liquid behind that tile that can cause the salts to become soluble, and then out comes the efflorescence. So very often if we see this type of thing, we'll see that the tile doesn't have the coverage that we'd like to see.
Great point.
Jim, I'll bring up this other picture. I think this is the one you thought you were going to see first. I thought I had it here. Sorry about that. This one right here.
So that's that same pool. Again, it's really a fairly attractive job. Unfortunately, it's a disaster. And again, I sent the first one and this last one in here really to give you an idea. I mean, this is somebody's home. They spent a fortune on this, and it's a farmer, by the way. Look at the ceiling in that room. I mean, my goodness. And it was a terrible, terrible installation. Terrible.
While we're on the point, we talked about control joints a while ago, because I see we had a comment about it. Can you touch briefly, whoever would like to respond, on the requirements of control joints throughout the pool and between the deck or coping and the pool itself? And the different, we're not talking about expansion joints because that'd be through the pool, but more of the soft type joints.
Michael, can you speak closer to your microphone or your computer? It's very hard to hear you.
Well, maybe you need hearing aids.
Well, I can hear everybody else. Maybe I blocked you out. There is that.
I'll mention, let me comment on it a little bit. And one thing I really want to stress is that glass mosaics, like you see in this pool, are extremely expansive and far more than ceramic and porcelain, et cetera. So, it's really important that we do allow for that material to expand and contract. Pools, once they get equalized, if you might, or filled, they're generally not much of an issue. But the water line, that's where you'll see the failure first. First couple times of draining it, refilling it, you'll start seeing more issues. It's unfortunate, but the movement joint requirements, if you might, which means for control joints as well as actual movement joints, are no different than they are for the tile industry itself. You know, in a submerged application, it should be every 8 to 12 feet. And I do agree with some of the commenters that in the notes, we don't see it very often in pools, but unfortunately, the reason I see pools is because they failed. They don't call me out to look at good jobs. I've yet to get one call to come out and, hey, come check out my excellent job. It just doesn't happen. So we go out and look at a lot of failed installations, and it's unfortunate. In this one, again, this is really not one that this is exceptionally bad, in my opinion. Even the block walls, as you saw initially, they cracked. I mean, it's a shame. But pools can be different. They're a challenge. And protection, as Greg mentioned earlier, is essential, especially in some weather. So depending on where you're at, I've done pools in Hawaii where they sit in 3 inches of water almost all the time because it never stops raining in Hilo and some of those other areas. Let me comment real quick on the one with the 1x1 mosaics that you saw on the wall. That was on a large pool in a school in Hilo, Hawaii. As I said, it pretty much stays submerged the whole time because it rains and rains and rains. But more important with that job, unfortunately, they used a V-notch trowel. And it didn't bond.
Oh, that was that last one. Okay.
Yeah, the whitish one.
Yeah, let me bring that up one more time.
I was astonished.
Right there.
Yeah, there you go. That's just a V-notch trowel. And even at that, they didn't beat it enough to flatten the V's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's one thing about adhesives, and I think I can say this for all the manufacturers on the call. We work best when we are in contact with the tile and the substrate.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could add something to that, Jim, one of the things that we've seen on these glass mosaics is contractors are going to beat the tile in with a rubber float. So when the rubber float gets wet and you start beating it in, unfortunately, sometimes it causes a suction.
Yeah.
So when you're beating it in and then you're pulling the float off, it literally can cause some voids under the tile. So you have to be careful when you're using your float to make sure the tiles are flat and beat in, that it's not too wet.
Yeah, that picture there just speaks volumes.
It's a shame.
On coat coverage, it's a true shame.
I mean, again, this is a large school. I'm telling you, this is a big pool, and it had terrible coverage.
Chris Kane.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, it's been mentioned about protecting the pools from rain and snow. I think it's also important to mention protecting it from temperature as well, especially the outdoor pools. Everybody wants their pools for summer, so when their pool's done, winter, spring, maybe the fall. And even if it warms up during the day, what's happening at night? So it's important to monitor that, not only when you're working, but the period before, during, and after the install has to be, within range for the temperature as well.
Good point.
Chris, what would that temperature range be operating normally?
Well, it depends on the product. You definitely, want to be above 40 in all cases, really. And sometimes it could be above 50 or 60. And at the same time, you don't want to be too hot either. So usually not over 90, just some general rules there. Like I said, all depends on the product. And, it's important, even though it might be 50 or 60 air temperature when you're at the job, what was it over a night? So is that substrate in the 20s?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, and Jim was talking earlier about, we're looking at some efflorescence or maybe some latex leaching. And one thing you need to be careful about related with temperatures is that as temperatures get cold, the cement slows down, and the polymer in the cement also, the coalescence, the ability of the polymer to form a film slows down also. So if you're doing early spring or later in the fall jobs, be very careful and very mindful that to keep the tile warm as you install them. So you let that cement reaction happen and you allow that the polymer to coalesce.
Okay. I would like to, excuse me, shift over to something provided here by Mike McLizzy. Let me see if I can get this up on the screen for you. Here we go, sorry. Shift gears just a little bit. Are you able to see this?
Is that Mike's
Yes.
house?
Yeah, how'd you know? So this was the most challenging one that we had last year. It was a Hearst Castle pool out here in California. And you see these are some of the beauty shots, but if you flip down a couple of the shots there, Mark, as you can see, they were leaking 5,000 gallons of water a day from this pool. And that was the biggest challenge, along with they had some cracked stone and that they had to accommodate. So, all of the things we've been talking about are real critical, being able to protect the surface and keep the water from going. All of the penetrations when they used the waterproofing, they had to be really careful because they had this, you wouldn't believe the elaborate system that they had directly below the pool that monitored all of the filtration and the water flow. The engineering underneath this pool was amazing. And so the other thing that they was critical was, and this is funny, the stone that was inside the pool, the pitches were not correct. So they had some areas where, it wasn't flowing properly. But the Historical Society said that these contractors had to do a topography of the entire system and reinstall all the stone exactly the way it was, right or wrong. So that's what they had to do. So they had to map this whole thing out. But the critical aspect here is, if you see in these series of pictures, the guys took real care to make sure they had good mortar coverage. That was one of the big concerns that they had. Like you see here in the top right picture, every stone that they put in, they picked it up to make sure that they had good coverage. Yes, thanks. Yeah. Because they were, so, I hate to harp on glass tile, but glass tile has become very popular and it's used a lot in the pools. And what we're finding is there have been failures due to the resins that are used in order to put the sheets together, in order to bond. And so what you run into is as the pool goes underwater, some of the glues that they use to adhere the mesh just start to dissolve or start to react in the pool environment. And the next thing you know, your tiles are failing. People send in tiles for us to test so that we can do bonding tests and do them in an immersed area. And we look for reactions like this. But one of the first things that we do when we receive these samples is we take the sheet and we put it in a bucket of water, and we leave it in a bucket of water for probably 5 days, 5 work days. Check it on the following Monday, and see if the tiles stay well adhered, and see if there's any reaction. So I would suggest strongly that if you have any mesh mounted tiles you're going to use in a wet area, that be the first thing that you do. Also, if you can look at this drawing, you can see that the resin covers the entire back of the tile. So you're actually bonding to the resin, you're not bonding to the tile. And the other thing that may not be commonly known is that when the film or that resin is applied really thick on the back of the tile, it can actually be a flexible material. Now you've got like a flexible plastic sheet on the back of your tile, and due to movement inside the submerged area, you could actually have delamination of the tile due to the fact that the film is too thick. We've done bond tests with different tiles with resins on the back, and resins that are applied very thin, we can get a really good strong bond strength to them. The ones with a really thick buildup of resin, your bond strength is diminished, like could be up to 90% reduction in bond strength. So it's something just to be very aware of. Anytime you have a mesh, do some really good testing, send it into your manufacturer that you like, have them take a look at it for you, and before you have to go through the nightmare of replacing it.
Hey, Mark, can I jump in a second?
Yes, sir.
There's some nice chatting going on in the chat screen. So anyone out there that's participating, if you have some questions while everyone's talking, go ahead and type in your questions because they're being answered at some pretty good answers.
Okay.
The other thing that I'll add to that is some of the sheet mosaics are bound with a very flexible material between the tile. The chemistry of chlorine, water and pools and those kinds of things can attack some of these materials and cause the failures that Mike was talking about. So you need to be very careful about what particular tile you're using.
And someone asked where these tiles are coming from. I think we all know that the knockoffs that people purchase out in China have been a major issue, not just for glass tile, but for tiles claimed to be porcelain, but they're really not porcelain. And then they're installed in a wet area and they warp and have absorption rates that are not at 0.5%, but more like 10 to 12%. And so they've been a real issue. So anytime that you get something outside the country, it's something to look at and consider. But I would say anything that's mesh mounted, put it in a bucket of water. That's your first test. And then if you want, contact your manufacturer. Most manufacturers more than willing to take a look at the tile for you and give you some feedback and help you through the project.
And note that the larger the glass tile, the higher the risk because of that thermal expansion component of glass. So the larger the glass tile, the more the risk.
Also add something just to piggyback what Mike is saying and what Greg is saying. ANSI 137.3, right? The glass tile standard for glass in general now has a submerged methodology to evaluate if a glass tile and glass mosaics are suitable for submerged applications. So Mike gave you all the tips on looking for that, but there's an actual ANSI standard for it now. And it's a submerged application that's an extended type test. So you could even ask your glass manufacturer, do you have 137.3 certification for this glass to be used in submerged applications? And that usually is a good qualifier too.
We're talking so much about bond to the tile. It goes the other way too. I've seen where a waterproofing that's not approved for pools, where the mortar doesn't bond to it. And the instance I'm thinking of was a waterproofing that was made for parking garages, and it actually repels water, and it's not meant to have a topping on it. So when you put the mortar into it, the waterproofing was rejecting the mortar. So they set the tile, and then the next day the tile was at the bottom of the pool because it didn't fully bond to the waterproofing. So it's important, I usually tell everybody to use the system, so that that it can be bonded in both directions.
Yeah, systems are good. And, there's like, I think what you mentioned there, we run into this a lot where polyurethane membranes are specified by waterproofing consultants, and they don't realize that they're very flexible, and you may get an initial bond, but over time, a lot of the installations over polyurethanes have failed. And the only way to really accomplish that is with a sand broadcast to rejection. And now you're bonding to sand. So a lot of these projects, if you can get in on them ahead of time, before the waterproofing consultant comes up with a product that's not compatible, you can make some good suggestions and help them to use something, as you said, a system of products that's proven and tested to work in that kind of application.
Joe Bignolis.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize Greg's point with the expansion of glass tile. It may actually be a good idea to increase the frequency of movement joints when you're working with glass tile.
Everybody in the
Just
setting
wanna make that
material world on the phone. I think what Chris was talking about, if I'm not mistaken, is crystalline waterproofing admixtures. And do you guys have any position on crystalline waterproofing additives used in concrete?
Yeah, if it's prepared right, Dave, it's no issue at all. If a lot of times they recommend sandblasting the surface. Sometimes there's a chemical treatment. And with the crystalline waterproofing, there's two types. There's one that's applied afterward and one that's added into the concrete. And the manufacturers of those products typically have a procedure for prepping the surface where you can get a good bond. And for decades, all different manufacturers have been successful over crystalline.
And keep in mind the pool specification in TCNA has colloidal silicates in it. I mean, it's not required by any means, but it's listed there. So having a silicate additive, a specific one, is not uncommon in pools.
I guess my point is that your normal tile guy is not going to be cognizant of this particular issue. And they run into it too late. They come back with a smooth wall that's, been treated with whatever. And, down to the bottom you go. That's the point I was making.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It definitely
Absolutely.
needs some surface prep before you can go over it.
Yeah.
And the surface applied materials are more of a bond breaker than the admixtures.
Correct.
John Perulis, jump on in, sir.
Hey, before you jump in there, Bart put a question up there and Art Minty answered it. And I was wondering if Bart could actually ask that question and Art could answer it live to everybody.
Okay, John, we'll go to you after this.
Yeah, absolutely. My point was that Art had mentioned 137.3 and asking the manufacturer to support to support that. And my point was, a lot of the discussion was on mosaics coming from China and other countries, and many of those countries might not have that data. What's the contractor's next step if there is no data available to show that it meets 137.3? And so that was to Art.
Right. So Bart, that's a great question. So we've gone down this path and had that posed to us many times. If the glass manufacturer is reachable, we will encourage them to get that sort of testing done at the Tile Council. And some of them have. They've complied with that and they've been good results. When you don't have that ability, in the absence of that, you can work with your adhesive manufacturer to try to coordinate that type of testing if time allows, because it's a pretty lengthy test. So you got to get into the queue at the Tile Council and you have to allow enough time to get the results. So if the parties are cooperative and you have enough time, you can certainly get it done at Tile Council.
I've actually haven't run that glass test. How much is that test?
So I don't have the price offhand, Dave, but I don't think it's more than $1,500. I don't think it's pretty reasonable when you really think about it. And when your risk is much greater.
Yeah.
We should point out that TCNA doesn't discriminate. Contractors can have that test done as well.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
if you don't want to wait for the manufacturer, you can go have it done.
That was
Yes.
actually, I was actually kind of heading there, Dave, and I appreciate you bringing that up because the consumer or the builder or someone may be willing to pay for that or partner on that in order to be, you know, or the distributor that's trying to sell that product if they can't produce that information. Someone might be willing to help pay for that so that we can all feel better about this installation.
I guess I also think if we bring it up and if there's no data, you know, then they know they're at risk from day one. That's my thoughts on it.
Dave or Art, do you know what the turnaround is? Brad Denny was asking, what is the turnaround to get that information if you were to submit a tile to the TCNA for that?
Art will agree. Get in line.
Yeah, that's it. So
That's
there
first.
is
Test 1, 2.
there is a period of time there, right? You have to have the samples have to cure for 28 days. The ANSI test is 28 days, and then you got to get into the queue, right? So whatever tile council's backlog is, so it could take several months here. So that's why it's not a solution for everything. You know, for time sensitive, you know, projects, it might not be a viable option.
As far as the queue goes, there's a sliding scale on the queue. If you pay the rack rate for the test, then you get in the line. And then I don't remember whether it's 50% and 100% or whatever, but then there's a sliding rate that they will, you know, if you take the rack rate and you double the rack rate, they'll start on it the day they get the tile, because that way they have the means to pay the extra time to take it out of their queue, because that's in essence what it goes for. So you can adjust whatever time they give you, you can adjust that, but you have to pay more for it.
Just getting in line, but the testing still takes the 28 days.
Yeah, it still takes.
You know, for the cure and the
28 days.
setup, and that's important.
If you got 2 months in line, and you can just pay $3,000 instead of waiting 2 months and another 2 months.
Yeah, I submitted a photo of a sculptural tile fountain I did a few years ago using the Laticrete's MViz system. And the cement contractor set up the pool portion of the fountain with crystalline cement. And I went over that with 3 coats of, I guess it's a different type of hydroban that comes with the Laticrete system. It's a heavier duty thing. And I didn't have any adverse bonding issues with that or failures. The grout system that I used with the MViz system hasn't cracked or leaked. So I don't know if that answers people's question about going over crystalline grout. I haven't had an opportunity to test RedGuard with a similar type thing because I haven't had a fountain since then, but thought I'd mention that. And also getting back to the glass issue, I had problems with a custom cutter that I use in Santa Rosa. It has a high pressure water jet cutter for cutting intricate designs out of stone and glass. And every time I gave him glass tile from Ansax, it snapped. And he told me that they pull the glass from the kiln too fast, unlike glass that's made in the USA. And that was an issue. And Brad got back to me on NTCA reference manual on glass tile, but I find it difficult to work with some designers once they have it in their head to use a certain product. And I say, hey, well, look, you know, sometimes they don't even check with me, you know, and I've even given some designers our manual, you know, the NTSC manual. And I don't know if there's some way to outreach them. I don't know if they have a trade association, but I see that's an area that needs some attention.
Maybe Bart, can you describe a little bit of our outreach to that part of our industry?
Well, you're never going to be able to solve providing education to all of these designers, John. There's so many of them, and they have their own association, but by all means, I think we have a responsibility to provide tools to give back to your customers, but also for us to provide education to designers, because often a distributor like an NSAC's, not picking on them in particular, but they're not looking for functionality of performance. They're looking for the products that are beautiful, that are going to be bought by consumers. So they don't always look for the back end of until they have a problem. That goes with cement tiles. All this new stuff sometimes doesn't have the testing behind it, and you're going to need to require that. But Mark's point is, we're starting to do some work as a group to try to provide consumer education. And when we say consumer education, that means designers, builders, other trades working with our product so that they know that we're a resource, so that they would have access to our reference manual to read about glass tile, for instance, when they're going to do a glass tile project. That's a responsibility I think we're going to try to really take seriously in the next 12 months.
Great.
I have a suggestion too, Bart. A lot of the manufacturers have architectural reps who can speak their language. So if you run into those issues, you can contact your manufacturer and get them to connect with the architectural rep, their technical rep, and they can help you overcome some of those issues. We've done that a lot in the past. And
if you have that issue, you can get in touch with our technical team, emailing us at technical@tile-assn.com. And one of the things we do is we can steer to manufacturers that would be appropriate for that person, just like Mike said. I do want to get to some more of the photos that were submitted. And Art, let's get into your photos now, if that's all right with you. What are we looking at there?
Okay, so I just wanted to highlight how there are different types of pools out there now too. So we're always used to the traditional concrete cast in place or formed gunite type pools. But what we see increasing in our industry are these steel tanks. Now, this one is a massive steel tank. This is on top of one of the hotel casinos in Las Vegas. And if you take a look at this, this is pretty impressive. And it's really a simple installation, believe it or not. Obviously, everything has to meet deflection criteria. The conditions have to be good. But basically, it's a direct bond adhesive type with an epoxy adhesive. And then you grout it with an epoxy grout. And these types of tanks are solid. You cannot get that tile off afterwards. And the benefits to these systems are that they're very lightweight in comparison to their concrete counterparts. So they're installed in places where you typically wouldn't see pools. They can also be hoisted and lifted into place after the fact for renovation purposes. And the great part is it greatly expands the opportunity to consume more tile. And that's what's interesting to all of us, right? So I just wanted to highlight this, and this is something that's very popular. And at some point, I hope that we can get some installation methods in the handbook for this, because it's very very popular and very successful as well.
Art, will you talk about cleaning it?
Sure. So most of the steel tank manufacturers are going to have their own proprietary protocol, if you will, to clean it, right? They call it a pickling process or passivation. And it's basically just some sort of method that removes any form oils, or fabrication oils is the right word. You know, because as they're putting this together and they're welding it, there tends to be some residue from fabrication. So just follow their proprietary method of removing that and let it dry, and you're good to go. I mean, it's that simple.
It is an important step. And the only other thing I'll mention is that where we run into some issues with stainless steel is, can run into issues is with transparent glass. And sometimes the adhesives that we have to use for steel are not as white as what we typically want used with regular cement type pools. And so sometimes you can change the color of the glass, and that's another important thing to test if you're doing some mock-ups and things like that, is how the adhesive may or may not affect the color of the glass.
To shift the photo on you there, Art. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so we all have these great photos of semi-catastrophes or major catastrophes in our portfolios, right? So I wanted to just show this again. We all been on the movement joint issue, right? And that really is probably the most critical element in these applications. And we hear the argument all the time. Well, once I fill my pool with water, nothing's going to move, and that's right. You're right. However, in practice and in reality, these vessels, no matter what size they are, require maintenance of some sort. Maybe it's not even the tile that needs maintenance. So they're emptying the pools, refilling them, on and on and on. So this is a pretty large pool in a public recreation facility that had no movement joints in it at all. So guess what happens when you empty the pool? So Jill mentioned about water drain and fill rates, right? I'll tell you that on the draining side, when you're draining a pool, that is really stressing the installation, especially if it's exterior. Because think about you're leaving that entire weight of all that water very quickly. And especially if you're exterior, now the top surface is going to dry out quickly when exposed to the sun, while the bottom layer remains saturated. You've created a huge differential there. And what happens? You get pop-outs. The tile will actually tent. That's what happened here in this application. No movement joints. The pool was drained very quickly, and we got pop-outs. And now there's a membrane that's installed directly underneath the tile layer. Guess what that membrane is trying to do? That membrane's trying to accommodate that movement. It's like, oh no, there's a lot of stress here. I'm trying to keep it together, but the membrane is probably the weakest point in this application. And when that stress builds up, you get these pop-outs. So this is another good example of why movement joints are so necessary in submerged applications.
All right. How about this guy?
So this is your more traditional heaving of tile, right? So this was down, I think in Florida. And, look at how much displacement is there. You can put your hand in there, right?
That was St. Thomas.
Is it St. Thomas? Okay, thanks, Dean. So maybe my colleague Dean had to work on this project here. So look at what's at the surface here, right? At the edge between the coping, they put a flexible sealant joint there. So they probably thought, I'm doing this right. I put a movement joint at the coping to the wall. That's great. That's what should happen there. But there weren't any joints, even in the water line, which is about a foot deep. There weren't any movement joints that were placed periodically to help this dark cobalt blue tile sitting in the Caribbean sun from popping out. So again, illustrates how much movement a tile application can experience and the need for movement joints to be in place. This was a steel tank that also did not have proper movement joints. And so what happened is they buckled into the corners here. So if you see the vertical corner coming down and the two horizontals, there was no movement joint here. And it was the same argument. It's steel. How much movement is going to be experienced here? This thing isn't going anywhere. The steel tank manufacturers want you, maybe not you, the tile installer, but want the builder to pre-fill the tank before you tile it to somehow stretch it. to make sure that it expands properly before you even tile it. So it's a fallacy that steel tanks don't move. They will also expand and contract, and therefore you need proper movement in these applications as well. And that's what happened here. Fortunately, it was a localized pop out and it wasn't destructive across the board.
And our last photo from you, Art.
Okay, so my esteemed colleagues, Greg Shad mentioned this, Mike Michelizzi mentioned this, Jim Whitfield mentioned this. When you're working in these projects, you know, especially outside, you can be in some pretty intense conditions, right? So this is one of our good builders who put this together. Southern California, in the sun, in the summer, it's 105 degrees air temperature, but your surface temperature could be much greater than that. So you might have to tent the project. Sometimes you might even have to cool it or heat it, depending on what extreme you're at. The point is be cognizant of your environment. The installation materials have a certain bandwidth of where they can work, right? And most of them top out at 90 degrees or 95 degrees, give or take. And if you're above those temperatures, you can experience some pretty serious issues if we're not controlling the climate that we're working in. So for the tile installer, there's no way you can carry this in your budget and be competitive, right? So this requires negotiation. It requires some sort of dialogue with your pool builders and with your general contractors to make sure they put you in a good place to be successful, or else you could have, you know, a lot of challenging issues on your hands. So this was just a good example of a tented pool, and the conditions in here were much better than what they could have been without protection.
That is some incredible information right there. Mike DeGiusti.
Yes, sir.
Do you have anything to add before we segue over to our Ask the Ref game?
I just want to add that, in my opinion, it's so critical for the tile contractor to get with whichever setting material people he's going to use, do a job site visit, make sure everyone's on the same page, address the stuff we've heard about hot, cold, control joints, because they're not going to be given to you by the builder. So you'll have to decide where they're going to go, and just make sure everyone's on the same page and use an entire system so that you get a nice warranty.
Absolutely. Any of our panelists wish to comment?
It's Brett, Mark. You know, this is not necessarily a submerged environment in the sense, but when we're talking about the glass mosaics and what type of, you know, Michelizzi was talking about the glues or the resins on the back, or what type of mounts they are. I've always considered it a semi-submerged area, and I always have my contractors that I'm talking to definitely take those precautions for shower pans.
Great advice. Shower pans see a lot of water.
And if it's the Brady Bunch and it's one shower in the house, it's never drying out.
That's right. And it's in the house.
Yep.
Yeah, in the structure. Okay. Anybody, anything else to add? Next time, so we don't have it. And I want to personally thank Gilles Bignolis from Ladacrete, Greg Shad, Tech HB Fuller, Brett Monty from Mercury, Mark Penine from Ardex, Mike Michelizzi, Custom Building Products, Jim Whitfield from Mape, Art Minty from Ladacrete, and our NTCA Region 8 Director, Mike DeGiusti. Mike, do you have any words of wisdom for us before we leave?
With everything that's going on in the world, COVID, etc., the backyard business is growing like crazy. Every market I know is busy. It's a great opportunity for contractors to tile swimming pools, fountains, backyards, because people seem to have money. Our crews and everyone I sell to around a 5-state region, we're just having banner years last year and this year already. They're booked up, outdoor kitchens. So take advantage of it. Market yourself for these outdoor pools and fountains. Done correctly, your profit margins are far more than regular job sites.
Thank you very much, Mike. I want to remind everyone that we will have another roundtable in a couple of weeks. Watch for your text system for updates. Come back. We'd love to have you again. See you, everyone. Have a great
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Take care, guys.
Bye.